McCoy, our director. T, do you want to say something?
Well, you know me, Amy. So, no, just welcome to everyone. It's so good to have you here. It's been so wonderful to get to know people over the past, actually 9 weeks now via Zoom, and to have conversations with all of you. And got to meet a few people before we were requested to go home. But thank you all for being here.
All right, thank you. So let me start sharing my screen.
And while Amy's doing that, I'll just say, please feel free to stop us at any point, ask a question, unmute yourself, or put questions in the chat box.
Yes, sure, thanks. All right, so if you attended yesterday's presentation offered by T and Debbie from Elhadi, they talked about qualitative data collection methods. So this is the most boring slide, I promise. What's qualitative research, right? So it's a multi-method in focus. Use many methods to collect qualitative research or qualitative data, and it involves interpretive naturalistic approach. Why do we say naturalistic approach? Is you study a phenomena in its, like you don't, it's not like you have control groups, for example. That's not a naturalistic approach, or not a naturalistic environment. You study the phenomena in its natural setting, I would say. Before we start talking more about qualitative research, it would be helpful to know if some of you have some experience with qualitative research. We have a poll. Jared, do you? Okay, thanks.
Give you about 10, 15 more seconds. Yeah, most people responded.
All right. So we have 50% of our participants today just getting started. So that's perfect because as we all know, we cannot just cover all qualitative data analysis in 1 hour. This is perfect. If you have a little bit of experience, that's also a good place for you. Fairly experienced, come join me in this presentation and just share your experience. All right, so just to highlight something that, as I just said, all levels of experience would benefit, get some from this presentation, or I hope so. As I've been doing qualitative research for a while, I've always gained something new every time I do something, even within the same project I'm doing, or working with another coworker. The way people think, the way people organize their thoughts, there's always something new to learn. So all levels of experience can do something with qualitative research or qualitative data analysis. And you can use this for all kinds of things. It doesn't have to be research, because as you listen to your communities, you might do listening sessions or community forums or interviews or more focus. Any type of feedback you get from your people, your community, you can use qualitative data analysis for that. It doesn't have to be a research where you have IRB approval and all this research criteria to use qualitative skills or qualitative data analysis skills. You can use it in any of these type of collecting data for formal, informal type of data collection. All right. I'm not going to go into details about every data collection method because we're focusing today on analysis, but I'll just briefly go through this types of data collection methods for qualitative. And when we say qualitative, we mean text, words, just people talking, telling stories, all these kind of things. We're talking number. We have interviews. You yesterday also covered by Debbie and T. Interviews are key informant interviews. Most of the time you have experts in the field that you have one-on-one interview with, and that can be, you can use phone, face-to-face, Zoom, any type, but it's one-on-one interview, somehow structured. You have your questions and so on. Then you have focus group interviews is another way of collecting data. You have a group of people that share some characteristics, and the group is relatively small. Like you're looking for 10 to 12 people, and then you invite them for a discussion. Again, you have your questions. It's you have a facilitator facilitating the discussion. Another way to collect qualitative data is open-ended survey or questionnaire. You can also always ask open-ended questions. People type in or respond to you and you take notes or something. That's another way to collect. Observation, it can be either observation. In our field of work, I don't think if you just look up observation for qualitative data, you will find a lot of very structured way to do observation. Like you write the minute you did something and the moment someone moved their hand and Teresa just fixed her glasses or something like that. These are the things you write in observation. I don't think we tend or we have that level of work, but I'm saying observation, you have a field, you write notes, that's data you can use. It doesn't have to be at 101 someone did this, a kid ran and picked up. It doesn't have to be that detailed, but it's still we have some level of observation in our work that might be helpful, or maybe observation just how people responded to some questions, things like that.
Amy E.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever told you this, but while Amy is talking about observation, I will tell you all that my career in evaluation got started. My first assignment was right out of college. I went to work with a technology project, and I was sent to the local mall to sit and watch people interact with this piece of technology and take notes about it. So my first evaluation was direct observation in that kind of environment.
And did you go into, like, did you have it? The professor who taught me in graduate school qualitative research, she did some type of research with organs, animals in some time, but I saw her documents. I'm like, wow, what did you do? Like, how did you even make sense of all this data? It's books and books with a lot of information, with minutes and seconds, and the monkey did that and ate this and jumped when someone walked in and interacted with the other one. It's really interesting, and it was very interesting just reading through her journal. It was really interesting.
It is, and you know, it is. I haven't used it in a youth development project, but for those of you in 4-H, I know it is. Direct observation is used with youth quite a bit. I don't know, maybe if Debbie or if Brian's on here, if they've had any experience with that, but.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Teresa, for sharing. And Another method is document and audiovisual analysis. So sometimes you refer to all documents. You can do what's called like content analysis. Maybe you have you refer to newsletters or maybe journal articles to see which topics were dominant through a specific period of time, or even audio or visual analysis. You can also do pictures and analyze what are in the pictures, or some audio recording, can be songs, any type of these things can be analyzed for qualitative use. So why do we do qualitative research? There are many advantages of doing qualitative research, or reasons why we do qualitative research. So you want to report the voices of participants. When you do quantitative, people are numbers. You have this percentage of people, that percentage of people, but you don't hear their voices. So a mixed method, of course, is ideal to give you the numbers, but what are the voices behind these numbers? And of course, with quality, you can't do like entire community the same way you do quantitative, like you do 60% of your population, maybe. I mean, that's a big number to cover, but let's say the census, you do everyone in quantitative, right? But qualitative, you focus on a small number of people, and that's why the results can be generalized like you study a small group. Let's say you study the migrant community or this, let's say the Sudanese community in Columbus, then your results might not be generalized to the same Sudanese community that's living back home, let's say in Sudan, or the same Sudanese community that's living in Alaska or some. So you can generalize the findings. It's for that small group. You can engage the silent voices, so you can be more strategic with your approach to reach people who are not usually heard. You can reach out to people who are underrepresented. Then you create multiple perspectives, because there are many ways people see things, and then that gives you an understanding. And then you can study sensitive topics. There are topics that can be studied, maybe topics that are not normally or usually addressed. Then you can dig deeper and study these topics with specific groups of people, or interviews, or so on. Then you can look at processes. With quantitative, it's difficult to know you're evaluating a project, but you want to know how did the process go and what went well, what went bad during that process. You use qualitative to get to that, to see the process and understand and learn. And explore in an open-ended way, of course. Develop a complex understanding. When I'm saying complex, I don't mean complicated, but complex mean like deeper, in-depth knowledge about your audience or your participants. And you reflect on your own biases. Very important. As a qualitative researcher, and maybe you come across some qualitative work, you see people like putting their statement, because let's say I'm from a specific group and I'm studying that group, so you need to write your biases, that I might be biased because, okay, I'm studying a specific migrant community, I'm a migrant myself, or I'm studying first generation in a specific country and I'm the first generation in that country, and so on. Most of the time you see qualitative, and the way qualitative is written, it's a little bit different than the quantitative reporting of writing. So usually people reflect on their biases, write some narratives about their background and things that make because it impacts the way things are analyzed too. So it's important to acknowledge these biases and be aware of the biases as you analyze your qualitative data. So what are the data analysis steps? Let's say you conducted your focus group interviews. You have hours and hours of audio recordings, and now what? That's the big question, and it's scary. And I tell you, no matter how many times I did that, when I get to the point of like, wow, okay, I have few hours of recording, now what? I remember we did a research, a national research on innovation and extension, I think about 4 or 5 years ago. We had 33 or 30, between 33 to 36 interviews, and each interview was about 30 minutes to 1 hour. All this data was recorded, audio recording, and now we got to the point of, okay, we had a plan, but it's like, okay, now we have these hours and hours of recording that need to make sense somehow and be reported. So what you do first is you transcribe and check. Transcribing can be done manually if you have audio recorded, of course. And you can do it, you type it, you can use services such as Transcribe Me. Transcribe Me is, Debbie, do you know, or anyone else? I know that it's with NVivo, which is a software you use for qualitative research. It's available through, like you can use that service. It's a paid fee. But is it available just like not through, let's say, not through NVivo? You can just get in touch with Transcribe Me, correct?
Yeah, Amy, I've used it extensively in qualitative research. It's very easy to use. I used my iPhone to record the conversation through the app. I've also used it, Transcribe Me, in a focus group where I laid my phone in the middle of the table and recorded it, and it did very well. And I've always had excellent services through them. And so if I have moved, you know, for any of you that I talked about the continuum yesterday, if I've moved all the way over into a research-based project where, you know, if I have IRB approval and all of that, I do use it. It does cost some money. It's not cheap, but the other thing is, if you've gone to all that trouble to set up interviews, contact people, do all of this work, to me, it's a small investment to make to get your data back quickly. My transcripts generally have come back within 24 to 48 hours. And they do link with NVivo, and it's a very nice feature.
Yes, yeah. And they're very accurate too.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Teresa. So after you do your transcribing, you read and you read between the lines. I would say read between the lines. Get to know your data. Qualitative data, and sometimes you get to know your data too much, I think, and I do that too. I spend a lot of time just reading through my data, and I enjoy reading the data as I'm reading the interviews, and I pay attention to the data. Take notes at that stage as well. You can take notes of, as you're paying attention, it's like you've noticed something's missing, you've noticed people are talking about this thing, you take notes, and you have your journal or log or record. You can take notes wherever that is. And I'm not trying to be specific about software or where you record this. I'm just talking generally now. That's the stage where you read your data, read between the lines, get to know your data. The other thing, which is the main thing that the main step, I would say, stage or critical, is coding. And coding is basically you're giving a tag or a name to some amount of data. I'll get through that in a little bit, but you're tagging, you're naming, you're giving meaning to your data. But how are you doing that? There are two ways to do coding. You can do deductive or concept-driven coding. And this is basically, it can be in research. I want to say only in research, but no, I've done deductive or concept-driven coding even for small projects, because you've predetermined your code already. You have a theory or previous research. But for example, if you're doing, let's say, for a specific program, you have predetermined ideas that you're looking for. Let's say efficiency of your program, or effectiveness, or leadership. So you have predetermined codes that you're trying to identify from your data. So it's concept driven. You have it predetermined in advance. You sometimes you create what you call it a code book, which is, this is my code, and I'll get through that in a little bit, but a code book is just a definition of what you mean, because sometimes you might say, okay, this, let's say, floor can eat off this floor. So what's meant by that? Oh, it's clean. So that's my code. It's meant, my code is clean, but you have to put a definition for clean, because you don't want it in other type, like it's organized, then you put the same thing as clean, right? Organized and clean are different, but you have to put a definition for what you mean by everything and have your logbook, you have it somewhere. What's your inductive or open coding? It starts from scratch. You have your data and you go your data one by one and sentence by sentence. You don't have to code everything. You only code what's relevant to your research. That's another thing, and that's very important. As you code things in a text, let's say you have a long text, you go, you read through and you say, okay, oh, I think the person means this, or this would mean that. That's the code you give. And I'll give an example in a little bit. So here I have raw data. You can spend some time reading it and just process in your mind, maybe write in the chat box. What do you think? Do you see some codes here? Do you want to write some codes? And you don't have to spend a lot of time and really think of if financial. Thanks, Dee. And remember, in qualitative, there's no wrong or right code, like ultimate wrong or right. It's you completely off, like this is talking about retirement, finances, and then you say pregnancy. Then that's completely off the record, right? But there's no wrong or right answer. I can move to the next slide and tell you that's my attempt to say, and that's actually how you would, if you're using pen and paper, let's say you have a number of pages, you go through the page and use different colors for codes. It's a little bit difficult because sometimes you run out of colors, you have more codes than than you think. But here, let's say that first sentence, the closer I get to retirement age, the faster I want it to happen. I'm not even 55 yet, and I would give anything to retire now. So this person is talking about retirement age. Then finances, and Teresa just mentioned finances, but there is mortgage to pay off, and still a lot more to sock away in saving before I even think of it. So, okay, they're financial obligations. I keep playing the lottery. So it's like, oh, this person had some dreams, right? And they mentioned it. Sometimes you can borrow, or most of the time you can borrow from the words that people use, but you don't have to, because people, different interviews or throughout your data, people might use different words, but they mean the same thing. So you have to pay attention to meaning. At this stage, you develop your coding book. The coding book, you say, for example, retirement age, even if it's like explaining what they say, water by water or something like that. Even if you're saying retirement age, the person is talking about the age they will retire. I know it sounds like silly, but it's necessary, because sometimes you work in a team and you want everyone to be on the same page. When you, what do you mean by retirement age? Then have a code book where your retirement age means this. And even for yourself, because sometimes things might get a little bit tricky and you have numbers of codes and then you get lost. It's like, oh, why did I code this here but not here? What does that mean? The other thing is you can code the same thing in several places. So let's say financial obligation, maybe you go somewhere, I don't know, and you see it fits with, I'll just throw anything here, like vacation time. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's just, you can code the same thing here and there. Wherever you think it's in two places, you can code it in two places. Any questions? Is everything clear here?
I was going to say, Amy, when I first started coding, learned to code, this was exactly how I was taught to code. We used the colors, the markers, and so you would get as many markers, different colors as you could. But it still is an effective way to go through a document. And I had actually a hard time in the transition. Now I work all electronically in Vivo. And so it was a little hard to give up that hand coding, but I know people still do it, and it is totally an effective way, unless you have 600 pages, then that can get pretty darn complicated.
Yeah.
It's still effective, and this is a nice example you have here.
I was also taught, you can use like Word document to put things together, but when I was taught this, I had to cut things. So I put colors in like a pile. So I'm cutting all the yellow things I coded, or maybe sometimes I give them numbers, like code number 1, 2, 3, then like cut them and put pile number 1, pile number 2, 3, 4, and then look at all your codes. I see Debbie saying, giving an example of, yes, the first sentence, closer I get to retirement age, the faster I want it to happen. I'm not even, yes, she said you can code this in dreams of early retirement as well. And you can see at this point, you're making coding into two places, and that's absolutely fine. You can do that. So as you move from coding, what's your next step? It's called theming. And theming is you grow responses together. And actually, to be accurate, I should have written here, you group your codes together to make themes. And I apologize, this shouldn't have been you grouping. Yes, you group based on meaning, but again, you group your codes together to make a theme. And I'll give you an example of how you do this. For example, all these codes, retirement age, financial obligations, dreams of early retirement, the theme for that, retirement anxiety. And as I said, there's no wrong or right way or one way to do this. I see it retirement anxiety, someone might give it another theme. Maybe if you think of any other theme, you can just throw it now here to show that, okay, there are other ways, but I think I've been looking at this too many times and I'm stuck now in its retirement anxiety and I can't think of any other theme for that. But that's how you create theme. As you go through your data, I'll give another example. This, we don't have to read all this, but this I pulled from all data we have. So creativity, technology, people are talking about creativity. Certain people have natural characteristics of generating ideas, problem solvers, people look at things different. I gave creativity. Then technology, people talked about technology, the use of technology, but these together, and maybe there are other things, all together gave me innovation or innovative leader. In that context, people were talking about innovative leader. They need to be creative, use technology, they're efficient, and etc. So you can see 3 codes, 4 codes, sometimes up to 7 codes can make up your theme. So innovation or innovative leader is my theme. Creativity, technology, efficiency, etc. will be my codes. And in every code, there are numbers and numbers of comments within that code. So I hope everyone is following. It's clear. Do you need any explanation? And feel free to free your mic. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, one of the ways that we think about this, and I really like this image from learning qualitative work, is that you have a document, and Amy did such a great job on that chart where you're taking a document and you're tearing it apart, right? And sometimes Amy, you said you did that literally, where you were cutting it up.
Yeah.
And you're pasting stuff here and pasting stuff there. So you're taking that text and you're tearing it apart, and then you're rebuilding it into these themes that Amy's talking about. And that's really what the process is.
Yeah. And as you do this, you might think you put something in one code, and as you develop other codes, you think it fits in another code, change it, you move it to the other code, and you move it to another theme. So it's not a one like straight process. It goes back and forth. You go in your data, you dig deeper, you identify new codes, you just change from one code to another, or one theme to another, or so it's not a linear process. So as you do your coding, theming, you had your theme. This is time where you look at your data, you review your themes, and you see how themes will help you understand this data. What do these themes mean? Themes, there are certain themes that are mentioned more often, themes were appearing but not really that much of importance, but maybe sometimes something is mentioned only once or twice, but for your research that might be critical and important. So it's not just about numbers of how many people mentioned something and how much something is, it depends on your research and your study. And that's what I say, yeah, you get to know your data, you get to know your research, and then decide also what's important, what's not important for you or for your organization and things like that. So yes, you rely on themes that had more codes into them are more important, yes, but that's not the only measurement. You have to also look into your data. And another question, another thing that was always a question in my mind when I started doing qualitative is like, how many codes I can create? How many themes? I'm sorry I didn't put a slide here for that, but the research is telling you anything and everything. You don't find a solid answer for this. I've read some literature that talk about it still has to be manageable. So codes, I'm not talking themes, codes, you might go up to maybe a few hundreds, 200, 300, I've read up to 300, but themes, keep it, like, I don't see you making sense of a report or a research results with 100 themes. That's a lot, that's too much. Even 20 might be too much. So keep the themes in that range of maybe 7, 10, or maybe 10 per question or per area you're interested in. But codes, it's more flexible with codes because this number of codes make your theme. Teresa, I don't know if you want to say something, you have experience.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Amy. It's the literature is all over the place in terms of how many codes or how many things, but if you're doing an analysis and you have got 100 different themes, I would say that probably your research questions or the questions that you were trying to explore was just too broad. It was too much, too packed in. Whereas with qualitative research, qualitative methods, you're trying to go deep, right? Down into the data.
Yeah.
So you know, and just if you think about a report out of qualitative data, how in the world would you even manage um, to tell somebody, oh, 50 themes came out of this? How could I intake that? So, you know, there's that part of it too. But yeah, coding, you can get a lot of data bits in there. But you know, once I get past 12 or 15 big themes, I'd be like, yeah.
So that's the stage where you look at your themes, your data, and see what you have there. And think if you want to rearrange your themes, you go through the coding a little bit, not all the coding, but some of the things you coded might fit in somewhere. That's where you make your data that to make sense and relevant to your, not you make it, it should make sense anyway, but the way you organize it and put it together. Then you get to the report writing. Like any report in research or any report in general, there are main criteria you go through. And then, of course, you have the flexibility of doing whatever you want. You have to have an introduction, methodology, and with the methodology you say how you conducted your data, which approach or which data collection method you used. With the analysis, was it one person analyzing, number of people analyzing the data, how many researchers, how did you go about your steps, did you create was it a inductive or deductive coding, did you create a code book in advance? All this information, it's important for the reader to know how did you go through the process. When you go through your findings, you always highlight themes, primary themes, secondary themes. Usually I put primary themes are the themes that are mentioned across many or all participants. Secondary themes mentioned among like less number of participants. But as I said earlier, it's not just about numbers. Please pay attention to your data and what's important to you. So some themes might appear that they were not mentioned that much, but also like that's where observation and notes, like how heavy was that on participant, for example, as talking about their experience on a specific area or something like that. You use codes, that's very important for qualitative. You can say I have this primary thing, but bring examples. You just take the exact code that the person said and put it. I'm not saying identify the people or mention their names here. So you have to follow all your protocol that you want to follow of protecting people if needed. But I'm saying bring the code and copy pasted it in your report. It's important. And then you have a conclusion, you have recommendation, whatever fits in your in your report style. But these are the main things that people pay attention to. Myself, I'm guilty of not making my my reports attractive and visually attractive. And it's an area that I need to learn, and I will learn about this. But I've seen qualitative reports that are not just words, they're really visually attractive. If anyone has experience, let me know, because I really want to learn about about making my qualitative report
Amy
attractive.
Kay is going to help us with that, right, Amy?
Yeah.
Amy Kometcher is going to help us with that.
Oh,
yeah,
she's try.
All right. So I'm just giving you an example here. Pictures of use to the left of the screen, right? That's the left of the screen, right? Okay, the left of the screen, you see use of software. In this case, I'm using NVivo. And NVivo is the software offered by the university. I happen to know NVivo since I was in grad school, so I just and also continued using it because it's offered through the university, and with the university, I think you get it for $50, I believe. But it's a very useful software. I'm not trying to go into details, but for example, leadership is my theme. Under leadership, I had effective and efficient decision-making, participatory decision-making, for example. These are the things people talked about in the leadership. And operations, consistency, less paperwork, resources. Resources was also had other like codes under it, right? Financial, human, all these, everything under operation is still under operation as codes for me. And I put them under operations. Then on the right-hand side, you see how you would have done qualitative using just pen and paper. I'm not disencouraging people from using pen and paper, but I prefer, since I started using, honestly, since I started using software, I liked and enjoyed using software. There are other software, there's Atlas, MaxQDA, and all this software, but as I said, and the university supports and uses NVivo. I find it pretty easy to use. You can go through, they have handbooks, online, YouTube videos, everything. There are lots of resources to learn NVivo. And they also offer trainings for the use of NVivo. I mean the, what's the name of the QSR, right? The company,
QSR. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So using a software, what are the advantages and disadvantages? It reduced the manual and clerical tasks, and that's definitely time saving, right? Then it facilitates dealing with large amount of data and improves the validity of qualitative research, which I mean improving the validity. You get to compare coders. I coded something and T coded something. We can do coding comparison. That's through the software, and see where we matched more or we less match coding on something. But there are disadvantages, as I said, the pressure on like focusing on numbers that can be takes away from the depth and the breadth of the data, and can be expensive because software through the university, I said, is $50, but I really don't know how much. I think it costs a lot of money to get it just on your own, and you need the skill for the software. And with that, I think I'll pass it to you, T. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I would like to save a little bit of time at the end and just kind of give you all the heads up. I would like for some of you to give us some, to think of maybe an example. Again, a lot of you said you were just getting started. An example of how you might do this or how you might use this in your community to think about needs assessment. Whether it's a listening session or a focus group, like to hear some thoughts about that. So I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly. And Amy, you can go ahead and hit the first thing we have here. And Amy put this tool together, and I think it's very helpful as you think about community needs assessment and what you're going to do in the future. Whether a qualitative approach or a quantitative approach is how you're going to go about it, or as we talk about, we're going to use mixed methods. You're going to do a little bit of both. You're going to gather some secondary data, and then you're going to collect some primary data. So with qualitative research, a strength of that is it gives you an emerging design that you can flex based on what you're finding out, versus quantitative research, which generally has a fixed design and is in those situations where it's called for, that's exactly what you want. You don't want to be moving that needle at all while you're doing the research. You're collecting your data, you're doing it systematically. Okay, Amy. And then the thing with the qualitative, and I think one of the reasons it is valuable in our communities is it gives the participants view. This is about, and you heard Amy talk earlier about voices. This is a way to really bring out the voices in your community, especially if those voices are underserved or new voices in the community that you can really hear them, versus in quantitative research, we're generally coming at it with I have a hypothesis, I want to do some research, etc. It's a little bit of a difference there. Okay. And then with qualitative work, Amy talked about, you can get a more complex picture of what's going on, talking about all the codes, the themes that we're seeing, versus with quantitative, once you focus in on those research questions, you've narrowed that picture. And in quantitative research, that's what you want to do. You're asking specific questions, getting specific data, specific hypotheses, and the data that you need. All right. You can just, yeah, tab on through those, Amy. And you know what? There are lots of researchers who would argue about this, but this is our theory, is that in qualitative research, right? Amy, I see you smiling. We acknowledge that we have bias that we're bringing to it, and we say, look, I'm biased in this regard, in that I'm a social constructivist, or I'm a positivist. You know, we use those kinds of big words in research. Versus in quantitative, theoretically, there is no researcher bias present. Now, again, people would argue about that, but that's theoretically. Okay. And with qualitative research, we're using open-ended questions where we are eliciting those voices, versus quantitative, where we're using more closed-ended questions predominantly. However, you can, you know, have open-ended questions there as well. And then our last 2 points. Amy talked a little bit about inductive data analysis, and this is tied back to, you know, starting with a hypothesis or not starting with a hypothesis, not starting with a theory. You're going out, you're listening to your community, and you're saying, what do you need? Let's think about it that way. You're not going out thinking, which is a deductive, I hypothesize that people need X, Y, and Z. Now I'm going to write a survey and ask them, do you need X, Y, and Z? In inductive, we're saying, what do you need? And that's an open question. We're using inductive. And then finally, ultimately, with qualitative research, flexible writing style used, and quantitative research, you know, you all have read quantitative reports where it's a more structured writing style. But people like Amy Kometcher and Danae Wolf are helping us to, I think, integrate this flexible and structured and make it visually appealing and all of that. So that's a nice way to look at your qualitative and your quantitative, to think about what you want to do out there in your community. So would somebody just open up for a couple minutes and maybe talk about how you might do some of this qualitative work or in your community? Thinking about needs. And Becky, if you want to jump in, that's fine too. You go right ahead. Becky's going to be talking more on Friday.
Oftentimes, I've used qualitative research in preparation of strategic planning with different groups, because they want to hear from their stakeholders, maybe the community members, maybe their volunteers, staff. So you might hold a variety of maybe some focus groups, which from my perspective is a little more focused. Usually the questions are a little more focused, but then perhaps also some listening sessions with some larger community groups, maybe looking at some broader issues. I really like using that kind of data, because I feel like even if you're just asking people to answer questions from an open-ended sort of standpoint in writing, I think you get a lot of nuanced information. But I think in a focus group or a listening session, there's the opportunity for people to kind of bounce off of someone else's idea. You know, when you hear things, sometimes it I don't know, confirms your own belief or helps you think about things in a different way. So sometimes I feel like I get a richer information from those sort of activities.
Wow, that's a great example, Becky. You took me back. I worked at Lorain County Community College, had a partnership with Extension while I was there. And I ran a cost recovery unit. So I did a lot of work with local government, nonprofit, and did a lot of work with Lorain County Department of Children's Services. And they, probably 2 or 3 times, Becky, exactly what you just talked about, they engaged me to go out and with their partners in the community, those nonprofits, other government organizations, and do listening sessions that then fed into their strategic planning. Others? Anybody else thinking about it?
This is Margaret Jenkins.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi there. And in the side chat box while you were talking, I sent a little message to Debbie Lewis asking her some questions about the interview process. And here's not the observation process. I'm sorry. I'm during this period of time, I'm going to be going to a food pantry and helping distribute food. And there's some other opportunities in the county next week. And so as I've been listening to these things for, this is my third day, it popped into my head, well, how could I use this experience to gain some information? So I was intrigued by the observation when it came across, and so I was thinking, what can, could I do that in some way? And so what has happened with this, to share it with you, is that Debbie and I, we're going to maybe talk about it a little bit more, and I'll let Debbie talk more about it. But I wanted to share that from your work that you're doing this week.
Great.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like Margaret might be interested in doing a quick exit interview for people who are picking up food at the pantry. Because some of the things that she wants to learn about might not be, you might not be able to use an observation rubric, for example, to get at what she wants to. So I think we're going to chat tomorrow.
Yeah, so Margaret, we call based on that's what we call intercept interviews. And you all probably have participated in intercept interviewing, where let's say you're coming out of the grocery store and somebody says, excuse me, would you mind telling me, and they might ask you 3 questions, right? I did some of that a couple years ago working with one of our educators at downtown Baltimore farmers market. We did intercept interviewing. And I think that would be, you could have 3 questions. You might only have 3 questions, or 4 or 5. You don't want to take a lot of time, but it sounds like a great project. I would say, Margaret, one other thing that's really important when you're doing intercept interviewing, and by the way, Debbie, I have another shameless commercial. I have, along with the educator that I just talked to you about, Shauna Henley, we have an article in the Journal of Extension and Tools of the Trade on doing intercept interviewing.
Oh, I'll write it down.
Yeah, so it's based on our real life experience. And one of the things I would say is really important if you all are thinking about something like that is brand yourself. Right? Have on your Ohio State University shirt, whatever.
Ohio State University face mask.
Ohio State University, exactly, Debbie. Because, people are, the thing about our brand is they trust it, and they are more likely to stop and talk with you.
Okay, thank you. I actually, after this meeting, we have our county check-in. So, I was thinking to myself, can I officially attend this or not? In the back of my mind, I was thinking I would do it as a person in the county, just a resident. I don't know the answer to that, so I don't want to create a problem.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but I always do brand myself, whatever I do. Oh, Peggy, I love it.
Jared has one of those nicely branded OSU masks too, by the way. I don't know if he'll put it on for us, but he does.
Maybe I can take a hat and put a shield on and put a plastic shield.
Uh-oh, there he is.
All right. Well.
Okay, yeah. Margaret, yeah. No problem. Just, yeah. Okay, glad to give more advice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Okay. We're good to go? Amy, thank you so much. That was wonderful.